So I'm going to be debunking the racist lies Vaush has been spreading for 2 years now that Professor Flowers wants a white genocide. Those clips Vaush's cultists have been spreading are all out of context. Either they cut out the parts where she says genocide isn't okay, or they choose a misleading clip to lie to people about what her argument really was. The framing of Professor Flowers is what convinced most of the left that Vaush is just a racist. But let's deconstruct why. Professor Flowers and Vaush are actually making two different arguments in separate debates. Professor Flowers is arguing for the colonized right to their own self-determination.
The point is that they need to be listened to.
Yeah, to be clear.
Does that make sense?
No, I think it's almost incoherent. So you'd make the argument that
it's almost
if you're
incoherent that I'm making the argument that colonized people should be able to determine what to do with colonization. So you can't understand that. It's an incoherent.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Vaush is building a straw man of Professor Flowers, where she's saying white people are inherently racist and she wants to do a genocide. To build his straw man, Vaush misrepresents genocides and colonialism. The fatal flaw in Vaush's argument is that he ignores the context of colonialism when judging decolonization. What Vaush's audience doesn't understand is that colonialism is inherently genocidal in any form. Decolonization, meanwhile, is rooted in self-defense from annihilation. This is reinforced by deeper readings on the connections between genocides and colonialism. Vaush accuses her of being racist when she refers to colonialist settlers as colonizers. But this is not racist or a condemnation. It's an accurate term, and only a descriptor of the effect they're having on indigenous populations. He also disingenuously pretends that she's racist when she begins to talk in terms of critical race theory, something Vaush also feels entitled to misrepresent. Even the gentlest form of settler colonialism can decimate indigenous people. Vaush presents the colonized as the danger.
The problem I have is that white people colonized South Africa a really long time ago. White people that live today in South Africa are just people. They're not like soldiers in the imperialist army. They're just people. Colonization is a construct.
They are just people who are still colonizing South Africa.
So you're doing it again. So what you're saying when you like make this point is that you don't think white people have a place in South Africa, which is again one of the reasons why I also think you're basically
I don't think they have a place in South Africa as a colonizer.
Can you ever let me finish a point? So when you're saying a white person in South Africa means they're a colonizer, you're essentially saying white people have no place in South Africa, that there's no ethical way for a white person to be in South Africa, and that's blood and soil talk,
what I'm
girl.
saying.
That's blood and soil talk.
That's really not what I'm saying. You know, all this talk about like, oh, you don't understand me, like you're responding to a straw man.
And downplays the colonizers as potentially innocent victims of genocide themselves. Vaush's argument is predicated on the notion that genocide through decolonization is even possible. Yet no genocide has ever happened as a result of the colonized getting their self-determination in the entirety of human history. This is why no academic model of genocide includes decolonization, because there is no need for it. This is why Vaush has no examples and needs to make false equivalences to colonizing forces like the Nazis to condemn decolonization. Vaush is 100% responsible for this confusion when he refuses to acknowledge the context of colonialism, and in doing so, makes an argument that's akin to comparing murder to self-defense, and then only judging the person using self-defense.
Wait, by taking your power back, you mean selectively stripping power from another ethnic group.
The people who colonized you.
Yeah.
The ethnic group that colonized you. That context is a little important, right?
No, it functionally isn't.
He is dismissing Professor Flowers' argument outright. This isn't about logic for Vaush. His only motive is to reinforce the baseless accusations of Professor Flowers being a Nazi that he made before the debate even began. This was in response to one of Flowers' videos, where it shows a debate between him and Dear Angel, where Vaush compares black nationalists to white nationalists who are just a front for Nazis. This also includes the moment Vaush claimed that Africans will be just as dangerous as Nazis if given time, revealing he believes in the fear of retribution argument.
And you're telling me exactly what white nationalists have told me. The only difference is you guys just don't have the power to start fucking people over yet. But give it 100 years, you know, Africa's growing pretty fast. I guarantee you that give it a little bit of time, you motherfuckers are going to end up being just as dangerous down the line. I don't know, it's gonna feel pretty weird when the tables are turned, but I guess, you know.
I mean, do you think the tables will turn?
I mean, the cycle of history turns, right?
Vaush was stigmatizing and harassing her long before the debate. When he claimed he had changed his position on black nationalism, that was a lie, because he encouraged the abuse by his fans, thinking she was a black nationalist and a segregationist.
Flowers, answer the question I asked you like an hour ago. Are you a black nationalist? I'm not going to be patronized by a segregationist, so answer the question. And then Vaush just starts doing the same thing. So answer the question. Are you a black nationalist?
Answer the question.
Now, it kind of sounds funny as I'm reading
Answer the question.
This is wow, this person in this tweet is super annoying. I wonder where they got it from.
He also lied to Noah when he claimed he hadn't seen any harassment.
Yeah, the funny thing is, even now, with all the blowback or whatever, I still have not seen a single instance of harassment from my community against Professor Flowers. Literally not one.
Because not only had he encouraged it multiple times, but he even scolded his audience for not abusing her enough long after the debate.
I feel like my main issue here, after all of this, is that you guys didn't go far enough in harassing a queer woman of color. I feel like you guys could have gone way harder with that, you know? That's my main issue. I feel like the logistics here just didn't pan out. Like, you could have gone way harder. That's the main issue, you know? Honest.
Vaush tries to force Professor Flowers to answer misleading questions based on false dilemmas, where either you allow genocide through colonialism, or the colonized will kill all white people without question.
People who are... No, I do get it. I just think it makes you insufferable and sociologically ignorant. Now, I'll ask you again. When it comes to South Africa, what do you think of the 6 million white people who live in that country? Do you think the black people, who are by far the majority, have a right to remove the white population? So what if it turned out,
about like monolithic people.
What if people thought within a country that the only way for them to escape colonialism, read racial diversity in their country, was through the wholesale slaughter of the white people who lived there? Do you think that would be justified? Like, if they were like, this is how we're determining our decolonization, would you have a problem with that?
Can you say that again?
If the third world, the oppressed peoples of the world, realized that nothing would really work, except for like planetary conquest through nukes or through invasion, that the only way to free themselves from colonization would be to simply encompass the world in their own power. Do you think that would be a defensible thing to do, or do you think they should simply wallow in their global imperialism, unable to strike back?
This is the real reason behind those out-of-context clips. And if you actually listen to Professor Flowers' argument, she's not only being reasonable, but she's correct.
I personally don't think that would be a good idea, but I do think that...
Do they have a right to?
It's up to... Yeah, I think so. I think they have the right to discuss what to do about that. And if that means that they have to remove the people, then I think that they would have a right to do that. But I think that would be really harsh. And I think that they're not even going to do that. I think that would be pretty messed up, actually. Again, like, I'm not a separatist, but I think people should decide what they need to do. And I also think realistically that just would never happen, because it's just really impractical on multiple levels.
So
like,
you think it's bad, but you think they have a right to do it?
I think that it depends what the situation is. Like, if that's the only way to get colonizers out, then okay. But again, when you look at people who've been colonized, that's just not what they do.
So
they
just
try to take the power. They try to take the power away by taking their businesses back, for example. Well, I think that I just think I don't really see that happening, because it's like there's like an impractical thing about like nuking people or like starting a war of
but what if they
people.
could?
Slave owners would make the same argument Vaush is using here. They claim that giving black people their freedom would lead to violent retribution from black people. This is besides the point, but they never did. We can't deny black people their human rights, because paranoid racists think black people will come for revenge. That's as true now as it was back then. But the same fear of what if is what Vaush is playing into. But it's unfortunately an effective tactic that many on the left are surprisingly susceptible to, even though it's obviously a fear of retribution argument. Fearmonger about the possibilities in order to deny the oppressed their human rights. This is why she's hesitant to answer his bad faith questions. She actually won the debate. When Professor Flowers gave the example of Kenya, she not only disproved Vaush's argument that there is no targeting a racial group of colonizers and removing them without genocide, she proved that decolonization can also be specifically targeted at the people responsible for the colonization, and obviously doesn't need to be targeted at all of the settlers.
Explicitly said that colonized people should have the right to choose whether to live with their oppressors. Now, when we're talking about live with, I assume you don't mean literally like room and board. I assume you mean a country. And that is explicitly an endorsement of ethno-nationalism, of deportation or genocide. There's no way to remove a large racial group from a country without genocide. There's just no way around it. You can't, like...
That's just not true. Like, literally, I just gave examples of people in Africa who, like in Kenya, for example, like the way they got colonized people out is they retook the businesses that colonized people took. And because they didn't have any economic interest in there, they left. Now, that's still not separatism because there's still white people who live in Kenya, but they were able to...
To be specific, when you say that, do you mean all their possessions were seized and they were destitute and poor and had no choice but to leave the country? Because if that's the case...
No, it was businesses.
But this was ignored. This reveals Vaush's bias against black people, where he assumes their actions were cruel and unjustified. None of those colonizers were innocent. They were exploiting Kenyan workers to the point of slavery, and the Kenyans were being killed in mass. The settlers knew this. The Kikuyu people were specifically targeted. The British killed 300,000 of them. This peaceful form of land back was their response after winning their independence.
Well, depending on how much of the business you seize, you can end up reappropriating the entire economic foundation of an ethnic group, which is what we've done to black people plenty of times in this country, so I know it works well at discouraging people from continuing to live in that area. This is fundamentally, like, I just, the idea of using state power to retaliate against a race.
What did you want Kenyans to do? Because, like, they didn't commit, like, mass genocide. They, like, kicked people out by, like, being like, hey, the stuff that you took from us, we're gonna take back. And now they don't have any power, a lot of people got out. Like, that's kind of ideal to me. It's like, what do you want colonized people to do? Like, be like, hey, you know what? You guys fucked us over. We're just gonna let you have the power that you still have. Like, what would you do?
Thousands of British expats live in Kenya to this day, free from discrimination. Unlike how the US treats black people, there's no better example of how differently Vaush treats white and black people than Kenya. With black people, he assumes they're guilty until proven innocent. Meanwhile, with white people, he assumes they're innocent even when being proven guilty.
I don't see why people taking their land back is just like, we can't even talk about that. And that's kind of my issue, is that there's like all these colonized people dealing with colonialism and it's messy. There's a lot to critique about it. There's a lot of good things in there, but we need to be able to talk about it without literally trying to compare these people to white nationalists.
So every time
that's
you
really
say
all my point.
Their land or taking it back from the colonizers, I wince.
Just to let you know, the only key difference between colonialization and genocide is that genocide is specifically targeted. Colonialization actually has the same exact effect as genocide. So Vaush's argument here is actually genocide apologia. Now, this should have been the worst moment of racism coming from Vaush, but that's arguably when he weaponized lies about the black crime rate to defend white colonialism.
Like, do you think that black crime is just a bunch of black people?
Individual. But do you really think that there's not a colonization issue? Do you really think that people do have their own autonomy
this is where I'm starting to wonder if you're educated enough to have this conversation. You keep talking about colonization. Wow. The sociological phenomenon of crime is not the same as the people in this country.
Of the people who colonize them. That's the issue. The power is still in the hands of the people who have colonized that place.
And a lot of crime is done by black people in the U.S. And a lot of crime is done by black people in the U.S., a massively disproportional amount. So, like,
the crime that black people have done in the U.S. is nothing compared to the slavery and colonization that's happened.
Now, that has nothing to
that's comparable. The fact that you think that's comparable says a lot about you.
You can't respond.
The black crime rate is a white supremacist myth. They are based off of faulty statistics that come from arrest and conviction rates. Black people are more likely to be targeted by a racist police force and are up to 5 times more likely to be convicted of the same crime as white people. Black people themselves are dramatically less likely to report crimes to police. There is an extreme racist bias with those statistics as a result. A more reliable source comes from the annual reports from the US Department of Justice on racial disparities between types of crime. They are free from the same racist bias, and they routinely find that it's white people who make up a disproportionate amount of crime, including violent crime per capita. For example, in 2017, they found that white people commit 44% of violent crime, as opposed to black people making up 22%. This far exceeds the margin of error that their sampling methodology has. But Vaush is choosing to use this white supremacist lie to defend white colonizers. Vaush is actually putting black lives in danger here. Fear-mongering about a white genocide and black crime rates causes racists to become so violently angry that they'll kill black people. Dylan Roof shooting up a black church was proof of that. How many thousands of racists did his words reach? How many new racists did he create that black people will now have to deal with? And Vaush and his supporters feel entitled to spread both, to punish black dissent. There is no redemption after the level of racism they've used. With Professor Flowers, Vaush crossed a truly unforgivable line. During the months of racist abuse he directed towards Flowers and black people on the left, Professor Flowers expressed concern for a person she could see being pushed to the edge. Vaush took her words as an excuse to fuel the ongoing harassment of Professor Flowers.
Either harassment or debate bros pushing someone, please don't engage them. This is like, yeah, like actual like narcissism, like schizo, or like real schizo posting hours. I don't even think insulting is harassment in this context, by the way. There's nothing wrong with insulting people who behave like that.
Once suicide is beginning to be brought up, any man with any decency would never have pushed further. But Vaush has no line of cruelty he won't cross. Flowers has admitted that they almost pushed her into suicide. Go like and subscribe to Professor Flowers, because she deserves it. To anyone who believed his bullshit, never trust Vaush. And if you spread this, you owe her and black people an apology. To those of you that already know what he did, call Vaush what he is out loud. Vaush is a racist of the worst kind.